Until 2 years ago, I have followed the typical Mormon girl track. I grew up in a highly populated Mormon city, the fifth of 7 children. Conservative family. My dad was always a ward or stake clerk of some kind and is a high councilman now, I think. And I loved the gospel completely. I'm currently at BYU, and I was married at 19, and I have a 2-year-old at age 23. And I've been feeling off since I started taking religion classes at BYU, but I couldn't figure out why. Something about studying scriptures academically was making my connection to God worse. That didn't make sense, though. I had a distaste for come follow me lesson manuals that I chalk up to mostly my disdain for studying. But I felt that way especially when I was doing some website work for BYU Studies in 2018, uploading their weekly study guides to go with the manual. I even met Stephen Harper, who edited Saints. He seems like a nice guy, but I don't know much about him. In 2018, I married my husband, who I've been best friends with since we were teenagers. And I got pregnant a year and a half later, unexpectedly. And it was stupid hard. I had to go to class vomiting for the full 9 months. My son was born right as the pandemic started, and BYU changed its remote learning flexibility to allow for Zoom. I think that's the only way that I'm graduating now, because I had no other support system other than my ward of also busy students. And that's kind of what really started me doubting. This is Infants on Thrones.
Baby steps.
You want someone to preach to?
The philosophies of men.
I like magical toys.
You want religion, do you?
Mingled with humor.
I don't believe in them.
There will be many willing to preach to you the philosophies of men mingled with humor.
We are evolving.
Baby steps.
You can buy anything in this world of money.
Look for the good in everything. Look for the people who will set your soul free. It always seems impossible until it's done. Look for the good in everyone.
All right, welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and this is episode 786, Transgender Testimony Time. And what you just heard in that introduction was the first part of a message that a 23-year-old female listener, let's say that her name's Annie. It's not actually Annie, but let's say that it is. So what you just heard was the first part of an introduction that was sent to me by Annie, who wrote this to me when she filled out the Infants on Mindfulness Survey, which you can find on the website, infantsonthrones.com, in case any of you want to fill that out and share some of your story with me as well. But I'm going to share the rest of what Annie wrote to me right now. So Annie continued on by saying, in my 5th year, about to graduate, freshly diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and ADHD, one of my eyes went temporarily partially blind 2 months after childbirth. I think from stress, but I never really found out. And now my son is turning 2. I have just felt invisible as a mom student here. I thought that families were important. I was under the impression that I could do both, work and be a mother. That's what my mom did, although she did drop out of BYU when she got pregnant. But I found that BYU has no support system for mothers, the only university in Utah without a daycare for students, and we all know they could afford it. I wouldn't have minded increased tuition even. Not to mention that they don't cover birth control for married women under their insurance. So if any of their female students happen to get pregnant due to their lack of coverage, they also don't help them with childcare to complete their degrees. I've also learned that the church has virtually no support system for mothers in general. Most other churches have daycares with background checks for their employees. We get nursery with people with no background checks so that we can spend an hour talking about scriptures. No help for the actual work that I need to do to support my family, as my husband and I have decided that I'm probably going to be the main breadwinner anyway. Also, one of my dear friends married her wife, who is a trans woman. And it hurts so much to see her unable to share even the gender of her spouse in conversations with professors during classes at the extreme risk of getting kicked out of school. And it hurts so much to see her unable to share even the gender of her spouse in conversations with professors during classes at the extreme risk of getting kicked out of school. I can't sit with that at all. They love the gospel still, but they have to constantly hide in order to survive. I finally let myself start listening to a feminist podcast, Breaking Down Patriarchy, which clarified so many of my feelings I couldn't define, or wouldn't define, about being a woman in the church. I followed several post-Mormon or transition period Instagram pages and came across infants as a recommendation. Listening to Breaking Down Patriarchy got me to a point where I felt I could give myself permission to ask questions for the first time. Within a week of that shift, I read about the temple changes over church history, Brigham Young and blood atonement, oath of vengeance, penalties, etc. All that violence, caked into what I had believed was most beautiful, pure, holy, and sacred, shook me so hard that I stayed up till 8 a.m. sobbing. That's probably my shelf breaking, but I'm still too close to that moment to fully know. I'm still wearing garments, but I don't know why anymore. I do think there's a God, due to my personal experience with prayer and what you might call an inner voice, etc. But I am open to other definitions of God lately. I do believe in a God, or a goddess, or even a non-binary spirit being that resides in the root systems of trees and fungi that calls me daughter, even if maybe I'm not literally that. I'll still be attending church because we're moving back in with my parents temporarily after graduating to figure out where my husband will go to school. And I don't think I'm ready to show my parents how hugely I've changed since leaving Mesa 5 years ago. And I don't think I'm quite ready to show my parents just how much I've changed in the 5 years since I left home to go to BYU. I just recently discovered your podcast, Infants on Thrones. It's been jarring at first. I don't know what current episodes are like, but I enjoy the mixture of smackdown and philosophy. It's certainly much more varied education than I got in my minor equivalent of LDS religion courses. I always enjoy discussions with multiple perspectives. And thank you very much, Annie, for sharing that with me. Now, in response, there are two things that I want to share with you. The first is a mini-sode that I created back in February 2014. Listening to you talk about your friend who married a transgendered woman reminded me of the role that my own inner voice of compassion for transgendered people played for me in my exit from the church. It was also the inspiration between my last fast and testimony that I gave over the pulpit, which happened in November 2010. So I'm going to be sharing this mini-sode with you that I originally called The Untestimony, and it was first published back in February 2014. And then after that, the second thing is a brand new, never before released publicly, at least on Infants on Thrones. It's an interview that I did this past autumn with a transgendered former member of the church named Ren Christensen. Now, I released this interview on Patreon a few months ago for subscribers who commit to at least $1 a month to support the podcast, but I haven't released it yet to the public, and there's really no good reason why I haven't done it. I kind of just forgot that I had it, and maybe I was just waiting to get this message from you, Annie. So this really is one of my favorite conversations that I've had with anyone, this conversation that I had with Ren, so I'm really happy to be reminded of it and to be able to release it and share it with you here today. So that's what you're in for with today's episode of Infants on Thrones, which I call Testimony Time. And now,
hang on to them hats and glasses, cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
This is Infants on Thrones.
Minisode.
Welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and I want to start today by thanking those of you who gave such nice comments, both publicly and privately, on the Regret minisode. I'm glad that I was able to touch something in so many of you, and hopefully this one will go down a similar path. So, at the end of that Regret episode, I wondered out loud why we don't just stand up and make our dissent heard when we hear things that we disagree with or that are just plain wrong. Well, Obviously the answer is social convention. There are consequences to such behavior. A Japanese proverb says that the nail that stands out gets hammered. So yeah, you act out like that, you're going to get hammered. I get that. But there was one time when I actually did take a stand and risk that public hammer. It was in a testimony meeting, so yeah, there was already a social space already carved out that would allow me to have some kind of a voice. So it's not like I just stood up in the middle of a congregation and began spouting out from there. I played by the rules. I just didn't exactly say what's normally said in those situations. So I'll tell you more about that in a little bit, but first, let me give you a little bit of background. Now, I want to tell you about Chris, and I'll be very upfront with you that Chris is not this guy's real name. I'm going to share with you some parts of Chris's life that he hasn't shared with very many people and that he's very sensitive about for reasons that you'll eventually see. And yes, I did ask him to come on the podcast at one point and tell this story in his own words, but he's actually quite terrified of being identified. So I'm calling him Chris, and I'm going to say that he was born in the imaginary land of Kazoo. So just go with it. Now, Chris is an active, believing member of the church in full fellowship. Well, at least in as much full fellowship as he's allowed. And he started his story with me by taking me way back. Way back. He started with day 63 of his fetal development in his mother's womb. He went back even before that, actually, because he's convinced that, like it says in the proclamation on the family, that gender is eternal, and that his eternal gender, that his spirit essence, he's a man, and that he always was a man, and that he always will be a man. But somehow, around day 63 in development, some chromosomal shift normally happens where the sex organs begin to form, and in his case, a little mistake was made, and a female body began forming to house his eternal male spirit. Now, he doesn't know exactly why this happened. He doesn't see it as some kind of a trial that God intentionally gave to him. It was just one of those mistakes of nature that, things like this happen. And he explained it to me this way. He said, Glenn, have you ever put on a Halloween costume with a plastic mask and you look out and you can see the world through these eye holes? You know who you really are on the inside, but no one on the outside can ever really see who you are. They think that you're someone else. Well, that's how it's been for me my entire life. So Chris grew up in the church, and he struggled a lot with his identity, and he struggled with finding a place to fit in. And then when he was around 20 years old, he'd finally had enough. He was either going to end his life or drastically reshape it. Now, thankfully, he chose to reshape it. He went through 2 years of intense psychiatric evaluation. Before any sex change procedures would be approved, he was given test after test to determine just how male he really was. And he was told by a committee of, I think it was 6 psychiatrists, that he had the highest male scores of any candidate they had ever previously seen. So he was able to get a surgery, and he began creating a new life for himself, where the costume outside matched more closely to who he was inside. But in the church, you can't just really switch teams like that. It wasn't like he could just walk down the hall from the Relief Society room and sit down in Elders Quorum, and now he can start passing and blessing the sacrament and stand in the blessing circles and carry around one of those little keychain thingies with the pure olive oil in that he had magically transformed from the normal olive oil into the divinity-infused healing ointment. He believed in all that stuff. He wanted all that stuff, but it wasn't available to him, and that was incredibly painful. So he reluctantly fell away from the church. But here's the thing. He got a girlfriend, and they started living together. And he kept telling her about how awesome this Mormon church was that he grew up in. And they prayed together, and they sometimes read the Book of Mormon together, and she started thinking, hey, this is a pretty awesome religion too. So she took the initiatives and she called the missionaries. And they came to the door and they thought, cool, a new conversion and a reactivation all in one stroke. My stats are gonna look awesome. But they ran into a little problem, because you have to be interviewed before you're baptized into the church. And if you're living together out of wedlock and you're having sex, well, that's a problem. And if it turns out that the person playing the man part in that whole sex thing isn't really technically a man, but more like some penis envy chick who thinks she's a guy wearing a surgically enhanced dude costume, well, that's an even bigger problem. A problem that took a year to resolve and went all the way up to Salt Lake. So Chris thought for sure that they would be denied, but his local stake president got involved, and he was a really good guy, and he went to bat for Chris and his girlfriend, Chris, with a K, not her real name either, and a letter finally came back from Salt Lake that she could be baptized, and this is the really important part, that Chris's gender on his official church records had been amended. He was now listed as a male with an asterisk, which he was told meant that at this time, he would not be allowed to participate in the priesthood. Now to Chris, this was an answer to prayer, and he never forgot that little piece that he was told, at this time, that part, because to him, that gave him hope that maybe at a future time, he would have the priesthood and he would be able to participate in full fellowship in the church. So for years and years, Chris lived a very full life in the church as a man, usually with only the bishop aware of his unique past. And he was able to attend all 3 hours of church and participate in priesthood lessons and hold callings and all that good stuff. Now, he didn't have the priesthood, of course, and he didn't have a temple endowment. He wasn't able to wear garments, which was rough for him, but again, it was probably only temporary. But unfortunately, so was this status in the priesthood, because after the whole Prop 8 kerfuffle went down, Chris's bishop decided that it would probably be best if Chris no longer attended priesthood or go home teaching or do any of that man stuff. But Chris maintained his faith and activity despite this, and he remains a faithful, active member to this day. Now, there have been times where he's been asked by doctors and by others to speak out about his experience, his successful transition after the surgery, and the way that he's lived such a rich and fulfilling life. But he keeps quiet, because one condition of this whole asterisk thing was that he keep quiet. And he's afraid that if he speaks up even a little, that his records will be reversed. But even worse than that, he's terrified that one day when he dies and is resurrected, that he'll be resurrected in the body he was born with and be stuck as a female for all of eternity. That, he explained, would be his worst hell. And he doesn't want to do anything to risk that happening. So I really appreciated that Chris would open up and share his story with me. And I admired the way that he maintained his faith in the church, because I wouldn't if I were in that situation. But here's a guy who believes and loves the church despite overwhelming obstacles. I found this inspiring. So imagine my response a few weeks after hearing this story when, in October 2010, Boyd K. Packer stands up in General Conference and makes the following remarks.
We raise an alarm and warn members of the church to wake up and understand what's going on. Parents, be alert, ever watchful that this wickedness might threaten your family circle. We teach a standard of moral conduct that will protect us from Satan's many substitute counterfeits for marriage. We must understand that any persuasion to enter into any relationship that is not in harmony with the principles of the gospel must be wrong. From the Book of Mormon, we learn that wickedness never was happiness. Some suppose that they were preset and cannot overcome what they feel are inborn tendencies toward the impure and the unnatural. Not so. Why would our Heavenly Father do that to anyone?
Inborn tendencies towards the impure and unnatural, inborn tendencies towards wickedness. Why would our Heavenly Father do that to anyone? Yeah, why would he? And more specifically for me, why would he do that to Chris? Well, the short answer from my conversation with Chris just a few weeks earlier was that he didn't, and he doesn't. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, like, as Chris described it, just a part of nature. So what do you do when you encounter things like this that actually have happened?
Isaiah warned to them that call evil good and good evil.
So this is curious. Does this Isaiah warning go both ways, President Packer? Because you're very quick to imply that people erroneously call the evil of immorality a good thing. But here's what I see in your talk, if I may be so bold. You are erroneously calling the evil of discrimination and exclusion and unkindness, you're calling those things good. So I think I'm going to follow that scripture. I think I'm going to do what Isaiah said, but now I'm a little conflicted.
They put darkness for light and light for darkness, and put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter.
Yeah, bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. And as soon as you get your big amen at the end of this talk, we will have evidence of an entire congregation confusing the bitter for the sweet. Because you, President Packer, well, sounds like someone's a little bitter.
Years ago, I visited a school in Albuquerque. The teacher told me about a youngster who brought a kitten to class. And you can imagine that disrupted everything. She had him hold up the kitten in front of the children. It went well until one of the children asked, "Is it a boy kitty or a girl kitty?" Not wanting to get into that lesson, the teacher said, "It doesn't matter. It's just a kitty." But they persisted. Finally, one boy raised his hand and said, "I know how you can tell." Resigned to face it, the teacher said, "How can you tell?" And the students answered, "You can vote on it." You may laugh at the story, but if we're not alert, there are those today who not only tolerate but advocate voting to change laws that would legalize immorality.
Oh my gosh, this story is just ridiculous.
Regardless of the opposition, we're determined to stay on course. We will hold to the principles and laws and ordinances of the gospel.
Okay, well, here are some gospel principles for you. They're called the Beatitudes, and they're credited to this guy named Jesus. And, okay, you want to hear what they say?
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
So the poor in spirit, I guess that probably means people that are feeling a little sad or discouraged or depressed. Okay, that's pretty cool.
Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted.
You mean they won't just be told to buck up and, get with the program? Okay, all right, cool.
Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth.
Hear that? Blessed are the Greek. The Greek. Well, apparently he's going to inherit the earth.
Oh, it's the meek. Blessed are the meek. Oh, that's nice, isn't it? I'm glad they're getting something because they had a hell of a time.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for what is right, for they shall be filled.
Hey, that sort of sounds like me.
Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy.
Well, I gotta say, there's probably a few reasons why merciful people are blessed. I mean, probably holding on to less stress and less angst, but that you'll receive mercy too? All right, sign me up. That sounds cool.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
Yeah, I'm probably a little too jaded and cynical to really qualify here, but I can work on that.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God.
Yeah, this is one of the coolest Beatitudes to me, being a peacemaker. Someone who builds bridges instead of burns bridges and tries to give people the benefit of the doubt and, someone who's diplomatic. I like this teaching. Be a peacemaker. Big thumbs up. Like it. Like it. Like it. Like it.
Blessed are those who are persecuted in the cause of right, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
You mean like people who just want to have equal rights as everybody else? Those people that are persecuted?
Blessed are you when people abuse you and persecute you and speak all kinds of calumny against you for my sake.
No, stuff like that doesn't happen. Not in the church.
To legalize that which is basically wrong or evil will prevent, not repent, the pain and penalties that will follow as surely as night follows day. If they are misunderstood, either innocently or willfully, so be it. We cannot change. We will not change the moral standard. We quickly lose our way when we disobey the laws of God.
I'm going to say amen there, but probably not for the reason he would hope. So this is the kind of stuff that was all going through my mind on Sunday, November 7th, 2010. The first fast Sunday after General Conference, and this was when the first counselor in the bishopric kicked off testimony meeting by explaining how amazing conference had been and how inspired the messages had been because, these guys are special witnesses of that Beatitudes guy, Jesus Christ. And how horrible is it that some people in the church dismiss the words of the brethren, thinking that they can determine with their own reasons of man what will be accepted and what they'll reject? You can't be a smorgasbord Mormon, he said, relying on the arm of your own understanding. And as I sat there listening to this crap, something inside of me just snapped. So when he invited people to come up to bear their testimony, I was the first one at the podium. Now, I started off by saying that I wanted to bear my testimony and that I do not know that the church is true. And I turned over and I looked at our first counselor and I told him that I was one of these very smorgasbord Mormons who he was talking about, that I believe that there is tremendous value in using the reasoning of man, and that some of the messages in General Conference I agree with and others I just don't. And then I told the congregation pretty much the same story I just told you about Chris, and I told them about his deep faith and his desire to be a member in full standing. So what am I supposed to do when I'm told to lead a Christ-like life all my life, which includes humility and meekness and forgiveness and all those cool beatitude things? And then I come face to face with the kind of arrogant disdain and dismissiveness from one of the top leaders in our church. Now, to me, there's just so much in this world that we just really don't understand. And as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we proclaim that we have this belief in Jesus and the atonement, this example of a God who so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son to live an exemplary life of kindness and charity and ultimately lay down his life to die for our sins. So, shouldn't that really be the foundation for everything that we do? That should be the default position for everything. Shouldn't that be a message of hope that frees us from our own parasitical nitpicking and worrying about perfection and propriety and exactitude? Shouldn't that allow us to be more kind and charitable towards each other? So that's where my testimony is, and that's what I told my congregation. This is where my hope and faith is. And that's where I want my church experience to be. But it's definitely a smorgasbord approach, and I'm not going to stop using the reasoning of man. So is there a place for me here or not? And those were the things that I said in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Now, that testimony meeting went on pretty much without a hitch. A few people got up and referenced or acknowledged things that I had said, but it was a pretty typical meeting after that. Now, at the end, the bishop did get up and he directly addressed what I had said. And he said, "Yes, Brother Ostland, there absolutely is a place for you here. And that goes for anyone else in this congregation who's having questions, because the church was founded by a guy who asked questions. So we just need to be sure and to be careful that we're always questioning in faith," which, I don't know, it sounds good, but I'm not really sure that it's entirely possible. Not if asking in faith means that you're asking questions that you already know pretty much for sure the answers to. Answers that you'll never dismiss under any circumstance, like the Book of Mormon possibly not being a literal history, or Joseph Smith possibly not being commanded by God to institute polygamy, that kind of faithfulness. Later in the foyer, I talked to the bishop and I asked him, what did it mean to him to sustain the brethren? Because that's one of those important Temple recommend question things. Could I still sustain the brethren if I question them the way that I did in my testimony and still live my smorgasbord Mormon life? And he smiled and he said that he thought that to sustain meant that you hope that they'll eventually get it right and that you'll do everything in your power to ensure that they do. Interesting response. I kind of like it. Not sure that President Packer would buy it, or Elder Oaks, or anyone else in that position, but I appreciated that my bishop felt that way. Now, I also had several members in the ward approach me afterwards and thank me for what I had said. They appreciated it. Some talked about wanting a bigger tent for Mormonism. Some specifically mentioned how much they disliked that first counselor's rigid point of view, but overall it was a really good experience. Now, obviously, it wasn't enough to keep me in the church, though. Now, there was nothing about the church or the ward that really changed for me after that, but things in my life changed a lot that following January. Again, that's another story for another time, and it's really not anything that I'll be getting to any detail about in a podcast. Now, we've talked about this before. I got a divorce. It changed things a lot, especially right here in this ward and in this area. But basically, I got to a place where I just couldn't sit there anymore for a number of reasons. It wasn't because the ward wouldn't have me. It's actually a really great ward, and I could pretty easily create a space for myself there right now if I really wanted to. I just don't know why I would want to. I've been back a few times here and there over the past 3 years, and there's just far too much emphasis week to week on the truthfulness and literalness of it all. I've gotten all that I can out of that, and sure, I think I have stories and experiences and perspectives that could probably help other people who wanted to listen and were prepared to accept the direction that I'm coming from on this stuff. We could talk about it. We could help each other that way. But does that really happen at church? Is there really a space to do that? I think that would just ruffle feathers. Especially it would ruffle mine, and I just really don't want to go through that anymore. You know what I'm saying? So let me end this minisode with my current testimony of the church, because despite all of this faith crisis and going inactive, whatever thing you want to call it, mumbo jumbo, I really truly am grateful that I was raised as a Mormon. I learned some very valuable life lessons from the church. I learned from the scriptures. I learned from the stories about Joseph Smith. And I don't think that the church is an evil organization. I don't think that Mormons are bad people. But I do think the environment and the worldview that is fostered in the church is ultimately unhealthy. I think that it's ultimately elitist and ethnocentric and egocentric, and it has so many parallels with the Zoramites and that whole Rammy-Ampton style of worship described in the Book of Mormon. It really isn't even funny. Okay, I was about to wrap this thing up, but I think this minisode just got extended maybe another 10 minutes or so, because guess what just happened?
Hello, my name is Elder Price.
As I was writing this last paragraph, the missionaries came to my door. Now, this is the third day that they've come in about a week, but it's the first time that I've actually been home when they came. So I told them I'd meet them at the church, and since today is Super Bowl Sunday and all, I got dressed into some church-appropriate clothes, and I headed over to meet them. Now, I really wish I would have recorded what happened, because it was so much fun. Now, they started by asking how they could help me implement gospel principles more fully into my daily life, which I thought was a pretty presumptuous question. So I smirked a little, and I really couldn't help it. I probably shouldn't have, but I asked, gospel principles like what? And they said, like what about reading the scriptures every day? I said, well, I used to do that every day. And then we talked a little bit about the scriptures, like how they came about, where they came from. And I eventually said that I just got to the point where they didn't really seem real anymore. It just didn't seem like the way the world actually works. And they asked for an example. So I said, all right, well, let's start with the Tower of Babel. So here's this group of people who are building a tower super high into the sky to get way up to God. And God sees what they're doing. They're getting too close. And oh no, what can he do? So he scrambles their languages so that they can't coordinate with each other and they can't finish the tower, because that'll show them. But that's not the way the real world works. I mean, that's not how languages change and how God interacts with people. This is an ideological myth that ancient people used to tell each other to explain why there are different cultures and different languages in the world. And there are lessons in that story that you can extract and use in your real life, like the dangers of pride and hubris, and there could actually be some value in exploring that metaphorically. But it didn't really happen that way. But here's the thing, you can't dismiss the Tower of Babel as a metaphor if you want to accept the Book of Mormon as a literal historical record, because remember that brother of Jared guy? Yeah, he was actually there, and he pleaded with the Lord, don't change our language, and God said, okay. And he reached out his hand and his finger, and he touched the glowing rocks, and they built submarines, and they came across under the ocean to build a huge civilization on the American continent that after about 1,000 years dwindled down to just 2 solitary men who engaged in mortal combat, and one of them got their head cut off, and he came up gasping for air. I mean, it's a great story. It's a really cool story. Somebody ought to make a graphic novel of that thing. But it's just not the way that the real world works. So one of the missionaries, Elder Smith, he tried to build on common beliefs with me here by saying, yeah, he could see that with the Old Testament, that there were a lot of stories in there that he thought were ancient myths as well. But when it comes to the Book of Mormon, that's definitely true because of chiasmus and all the things that Joseph Smith got right that no one with a third-grade education could possibly know. Like the measuring system with the coins that are described in the Book of Alma, or the sunken cities that the Book of Mormon describes that they actually discovered down in South America. They actually fit the description of the city of Bountiful. Well, we went back and forth like this for about 45 minutes, and I talked to them about a lot of these things that I found out over the past several years. The made-up word telestial, the obvious folk tale of Job, the Egyptian papyri and the Book of Abraham, the messages of fear that you get in the church, like Elder Bednar's object lesson to that poor little kid who just wanted to know how to start reading his scriptures again. And we covered a lot of things that I've covered on podcasts before, and we could go into more detail about it now, but really, here's the gist of it. I walked away from the missionaries realizing more clearly than I ever have that I have no guilt, I have no shame, and I have complete confidence in the decisions that I've made and in the reasons that I have for no longer being an active, believing member of the Mormon Church. It's not a decision that I came to lightly. I didn't just wake up one day and go, this is kind of stupid, I'm done. I've invested a lot of time and energy into reading and searching and pondering the teachings of the church. And it started with the teachings of the church. I didn't even start with anti-Mormon stuff. Now, of course, I don't know everything that there is to know out there. There's still a ton of stuff, but I do know a lot. And so when they ask me, what do I think happens when I die? I very frankly and honestly said, I don't know. But if I die tomorrow and it turns out that I'm standing face to face with Jesus, I expect that he would put his arms around me and say, Glenn, I understand. I get it. I know who you are and I know what you've done, and I've watched you make the decisions that you've made your entire life. It's all good. But I don't know what happens when we die. All I know is that I'm right here, right now, and I need to make the best of it with the people who I love who are around me. And like I said before, I really am grateful to the church for all of the lessons that I learned about how to do that, because I learned a lot of cool stuff that I use in my everyday life. I use it at work, I use it at home, and it's really good stuff. Now, it's not exclusive to Mormonism. It's not even exclusive to the Judeo-Christian tradition, but it's good stuff like this. And charity suffereth long, and is kind, and envieth not, and is not puffed up, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, and rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, if ye have not charity, you are nothing, for charity never faileth. Wherefore cleave unto charity, which is the greatest of all, for all things must fail. And those things and those lessons I share with you in the name of President Boyd K. Packer. Because, dude, seriously, come on. Amen. Anyone for the closing prayer? Lordy.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So you're going to have to recreate everything that you just said, Brian, because it was just perfect.
Oh, yeah. So, I've been listening to your show for such a long time, and it's so cool. And I was just thinking to myself, like, oh, wow, I'm going to be on Infants on Thrones. That's so cool. All right.
See, but you've been part of this like experimental study group thing and done such a great job. Like the things that you record and what you edit and put together, you've got a talent for it. Is that something that you do in other places, or have you just done it for that?
I mean, I've dabbled with like doing stuff like that for off and on different things. I once tried to start a podcast called like the internet's #1 MacGyver review show, where I was going to review MacGyver episodes.
Like when MacGyver, that was in the 80s, right?
Yeah. My all my older siblings, my oldest brother loved MacGyver, and I looked up to him a lot, and so I watched it a lot also, and I just thought it was cool. Richard Dean Anderson.
Yeah.
Heartthrob, what a guy.
So you were going to do just like a retrospective look back at MacGyver. So what made you stop? Why didn't you do it?
Oh, I had to finish my PhD, and
that wouldn't have stopped MacGyver.
I know. Well, okay, so I was gonna do this thing where each week when I would watch an episode of MacGyver, I would try to recreate like a MacGyverism from the show, right? So in the pilot episode of MacGyver, he stops a sulfuric acid leak with a bar of chocolate. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to stop a sulfuric acid leak with a bar of chocolate. So I stole some acid from my lab at school, and I probably shouldn't admit this, but I didn't take any kind of like safety precautions. I just like poured it in this bottle and put it in my backpack. And when I got home, it had burnt a hole through my backpack because I didn't like take care to like clean off the bottle.
Because it wasn't a chocolate backpack.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And my partner got really mad and said no more MacGyver experiments. And I was like, okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So here we are in the process of recording something for Infants on Thrones.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm throwing it to you, Ren.
All right.
I already know some really, I think, fascinating things about you and your story. And I don't know how much you want to share or talk about with the audience, but you tell me, what do you want to?
I should probably maybe give a disclaimer up front, or I don't know how my voice sounds, but I'm transgender, a male to female transgender woman, and I've been in the process of transitioning for a little over a year, and I think it's been coming along pretty well. And one of the hardest things to tackle with that is like your voice. It's one of the things that causes a lot of dysphoria for me. I don't know if you're probably familiar with that term, but but I'm trying to put myself out there. I'm trying to embrace it as much as I can and not be afraid of it, and kind of can take ownership of my of who I am. And so that's kind of something that I should get out there, but really in my day-to-day life, after coming out as transgender, I'm really in a very fortunate place where my employees are super supportive, and I have a very supportive spouse and a really good friend who's really super supportive. And it's not.
Do you have children as well?
No.
Okay.
And I don't know. I can't have children physically, and so my partner and I are kind of like, well, that's okay, because we don't really want each other. Yeah. We have dogs. We love dogs, and our oldest dog, Saint Bernard, by the name of Luca, just passed away last week, and it was really hard. But we're getting through it. We've got our 2 other dogs, and
And I don't know if you can hear my dog's out barking in the pool right now. She's like been dying to swim all day.
Oh.
And I've just been swamped. And so finally we had just like a little window of time. So she's out there swimming. I had to come in, but she's you might hear her barking quite a bit. That's her euphoria, which is the opposite of dysphoria.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And so what I want to talk about, I guess, like you mentioned, we've been kind of participating in this experimental Open Hearts Club and trying to share some thoughts with each other. It's been a lot of fun, but I've got to say, you are really playing fast and loose with a lot of like scientific terms that are kind of like.
There's nothing wrong with the science here.
Perhaps you mean a different thing than I do when you say science.
Wow, I don't know.
Now this sounds like somebody who has a PhD in physics that's talking to me right now. We haven't let people know that's your PhD.
Right. Yeah, I got a PhD in physics from Arizona State, and it's not as cool as it sounds. As like I said, in the Open Hearts thing, a lot of people when they think PhD in physics, they start thinking about like quantum mechanics, or they think Einstein's theory of relativity.
I think about Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory.
You actually had it right in the first place.
Sure. I did biophysics. And I researched the biomechanical properties of cells, specifically what's called macrophage cells in the human body, and their interaction with different surfaces that we coated with specific types of proteins to kind of see how the cells would react. Macrophage cells are cells that are part of the immune response and part of injury healing. Anytime you cut your skin, these macrophage cells come by and kind of try to fight off infection and stuff.
See, you're like walking right into all of my favorite talking points right here, maybe without even knowing it, Ren. But like, so I'm very interested to hear about what I'm saying that's fast and loose with scientific concepts and having a conversation around that. But I've been so fascinated recently thinking about the human body being a collection of living cells.
Yeah.
Like living beings. And I think that they have their own type of conscious experience of existence, which isn't the way that we do it. But so you're talking about these macrophages and you're looking at how they respond to surface, like proteins on a surface.
Yeah.
What like, would you agree with me, or is this fast and loose that these cells have an awareness of their environment and they respond to environmental stimuli?
Well, definitely cells respond to environmental stimuli. I mean, that's uncontroversial, I think. And different types of cells react differently to different types of their environment, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, when you start talking about cell differentiation, what changes one cell into a different type of cell? What's the difference between like your bone cell and your brain cell? A really large part of what makes that division happen is their environment, right?
Yeah.
So like a bone cell knows to be a bone cell because it's surrounded by bone, and
because each one of these cells in the nucleus has the DNA that is the blueprint to become any cell anywhere it needs in the body. So it gets like the certain proteins and probably other things that tell it, we need you to go over here and become this thing.
Yeah. As an adult, the cells are kind of groups of cells are kind of set in their own like path, and there's not a lot of like cross differentiation happening inside an adult human body. But certainly at like the very early stages of embryonic development, all of those cells got to organize themselves into the different parts of the body, and they got to start forming the different organs and stuff, and they do that through environmental stimuli, right?
Would you consider, because here's one of these terms that I hope I'm not like stealing your thunder on what I do fast and loose with, but one of the terms that I know that people have a problem with, and maybe you've expressed this in that study group too, is when I start using the word intelligence. And so like, if you're talking about the immune system, I've been thinking about this a lot recently. Like if I accidentally cut my skin while I'm cutting an apple, I can put a Band-Aid on it. I can put Neosporin on it. I can do all these things. That's not really what's going to heal, eventually that cut's going to go away. It's like, there might be a little bit of a scar, but there's this whole process of healing that's going on my body just does. Like my central nervous system just knows how to do it. And I know I'm using anthropomorphic words like knows because but the intelligence on how to fix that cut, how to heal that cut is already in my body. I consciously don't do anything to either initiate it or stop it from happening. I can't just think it into existence. So like I use that as a way of thinking about this deep intelligence that just exists in nature that's totally outside of human consciousness, and I start getting amazed by it.
Yeah, it's that's one of those terms, like intelligence. Like, what does it really mean to be intelligent? Because certainly you take like the first level approximation of the word intelligence, and most people would be like, no, there's no intelligence in nature, or like whatever you're talking about. But when you really dig deep and ask somebody, well, what does it mean? What is human intelligence? Like, what do you mean when you say like somebody is more intelligent than another person?
Yeah.
And you start kind of pulling that apart and digging at the like root of what intelligence is. Then you find, okay, well, it's just basically, responding to patterns, and that's definitely what like cells do. That's definitely what nature does. I hesitate to say like nature in quotes, but certainly like organisms all over the world like do that, right? They do what it takes to survive, and what it takes to survive is pattern recognition, right?
Pattern recognition, stimulus and response.
Yeah.
So you hesitate to put nature, you put that kind of in quotes. What are the things that you would exclude, and what are the things that you would include as being intelligent in nature?
Okay, so you've already kind of boxed me into this like
see what happens. Climb into the spider web, Brad. There's plenty of room here.
Because we still haven't agreed on like what intelligence is, right? Like so if you have a really broad definition of intelligence, then of course you can include just about anything on earth, right?
What is that? See, I thought that we did. I thought that we agreed that intelligence is, and now I don't remember what we said a minute ago, but that stimulus and response and the repeated patterns.
Right. Stimulus and response and repeating patterns. I mean, you can find that in just about anything, even like non-organic stuff, right? Like
like rocks.
Like rocks. Yeah.
Geodes, crystals, if you will. And I'm not saying crystal clutching, they're going to heal you kind of stuff, but so the broad definition of intelligence would be just that there is that kind of predictable pattern. There's some kind of data somewhere that's saying if you encounter this kind of, and again, it's impossible to talk about this without anthropomorphizing it, but I don't want to, I don't mean to anthropomorphize it, make it seem like nature is human, because humanity is nature, it's not the other way around.
Right.
So if there's intelligence in humans, it would seem to reason that there's intelligence in nature, but that doesn't mean I'm talking about like, if I think I want to do something, then I'm going to do it, and I can choose whether, like, I've got free will. Like, I'm not saying that nature has free will or like anything like that. That it has intentions on what it does, but just there is some data that is stored somewhere that is telling a rock how to be a rock, and what's the difference between like different types of rock, different types of minerals, the different molecules, the different chemicals, different atoms, the way that all comes together. There is some intelligent pattern of stimulus and response that dictates both organic and inorganic nature.
Yeah, I don't know if you get much into thermodynamics or statistical mechanics, but there was this fella by the name of Shannon I can't remember when, but they came up with the idea of Shannon entropy, or basically this idea that all thermodynamics or statistical mechanics is actually, you can express it in terms of information. And so, everything has some amount of information, and that information has to be organized in a certain way. And over time, the information kind of gets scattered, or that is like, there's more and more information to learn about any kind of given system over time. So you probably heard, like, the second law of thermodynamics expressed in terms of entropy, that the useful heat in any system has to get scattered over time, or sometimes people love to talk about like chaos and order, but that's silly. And, yeah, so this fella had the idea that, instead of thinking about it in terms of heat, let's think about it in terms of information. And there's a whole tons and tons of eggheads who spend a lot of time thinking about information and systems.
All right. So are you still saying that I play fast and loose with the word intelligence when I'm applying it to nature?
I mean, I'm not too worried about the word intelligence.
Okay.
The one word that I really wanted to pin you down on tonight was the word energy.
Oh, yeah. Good. Good. Yeah.
Because that's the one that you keep bringing up and talking about, like the quantum field of energy that we're all a part of and everything.
You've listened to the David Tong lecture, because we went back and forth in the study group on this.
Yeah.
So he calls it energy.
I think if you listen real closely to it, he doesn't call it energy. He calls electrons themselves as little bundles of energy, but the quantum field is not.
He doesn't say it's a whole field of energy that fills the entire universe?
No, he says there is a quantum field that fills the entire universe, and that field has little bundles of energy.
Okay.
And those bundles of energy are electrons.
Okay.
Right?
So what is the electron field? If the electron field, because he describes it as like an ocean that has these waves, and that you could think of like the crest of a wave as like this quantumized bundle of energy. That's like highly concentrated compared to the rest of the field that's not so concentrated, but it's not energy.
Now, the field itself is just that. It's a field, right? It's fundamental. And it's a mathematical construct. You can't really say, well, what is the field? It's the field. It's not made out of anything. It is what it is, right?
It's not made out of anything, but it is what everything is made out of.
Yes.
So everything is made out of something that isn't made out of anything.
It's made out of itself.
Okay. But what it is, we don't know, but we know it's not energy, even though it bundles up in highly concentrated things that we call energy.
Yeah, the energy is a property of the field, right?
Okay.
So it's kind of like, when you say like, oh, it's a field of energy, in my mind, it's very analogous to saying, it's a field of temperature. We're all temperature. And then, in my mind, that's like, well, that doesn't make stuff isn't temperature, right?
What's a better word for it? What would feel more comfortable to you?
What would feel more comfortable to me?
Just field?
The electron field, right?
Yeah, but there's more fields than just the electron field, right? Because there's a boson field and a proton field. There's probably about 24. For any fundamental particle of matter, there is a field that particle is emerging from. And so it's these overlapping fields that, as they interact with each other and ripple and whatever all that is what's responsible for everything that we see as reality.
Yeah.
So but the way that I'm doing it fast and loose is by calling that energy, and that.
Yeah, well, what I want to know is, like, what does that mean to you? Like, why are you using the word energy, and why do you like to use the word energy? And when you think of energy, like, what is it that you are thinking that means?
Potential, like kind of like a like a cloud potential. I think I'm using that because that's the way that I thought that David Tong was talking about it. I'll go back and I'll listen more carefully, but I don't know what else to call it. Just that it's potential. I don't know. Yeah, I really don't even know what it is.
Yeah, and I think that that's the case with a lot of people, right? Like we don't really know.
Or everyone.
Yeah,
no one
everyone,
knows.
exactly. Yeah. With everyone, we don't really. Yeah. It's an abstract concept, and we have a really hard time with abstract concepts.
Yeah.
But everybody likes to use that word because it must resonate with you somehow, right? Like there must like when people talk about, the energy of chakras or the energy of like their auras or something, like they're trying to convey something, right? And what's really interesting to me is like, what is it that they're trying to convey? Like, why do people make these appeals in this scientific language to something that ultimately isn't describable scientifically, right?
Due to ignorance. I think, just my ignorance of any better word to use or better concept to have. I haven't come across anything better. Like I've come across spirit. That was the first way that I was taught to talk about this thing. And that became very dissatisfying for many, many reasons.
Yeah.
Using the word God. Yeah, not that, because that conjures up too many issues that isn't what it is. So I guess to go back to your question, what's the appeal to me of energy? It's that it's kind of amorphous and undefinable, and it could be anything and everything.
Yeah. So when we talk about how everything has this inherent potential to be anything and everything, right? Like any point in space or whatever, or quantum, whatever you want to call it, has this potential, I don't know, universe egg, I guess. And thinking about that is very interesting, but why, like, how does it help you in your quest that you've been talking a whole bunch about, Glenn, with your quest to drop judgment on your road to becoming the bodhisattva?
Yeah.
How is knowing that fact, like, how does that, like, I don't know, help you?
It levels the playing field. It says that when it comes down to what every single one of us is made of, it's not our gender. It's not our culture. It's not the color of our skin. It's not how much money we've got in the bank. It's not where we live or how we are all the same thing when it boils down to it. We're all the same thing. And that can be extended to this planet. It can be extended to animals. It can be extended to everything. And so that thought, and like when I look at somebody now and I think, okay, instead of seeing all of the things that are different about us, I'm going to force myself to think we are so similar in ways that I just cannot understand. I can't understand. And whatever that thing is, whether you want to call it energy or something else, or temperature, the temperature that feels the entire everything, the temperature that we're all made from, it levels the playing field for me. And so then the quest to become the bodhisattva it's another symbol, way of saying, I just want to be accepting and loving. And if somebody needs help, I'll go, okay, yeah, I'll help you. Not screw you. You're not the right type of person for me to help, or you don't deserve it for some reason, because for whatever reason, it's just like, okay, yeah, you are another version of me. That and I like thinking about it. I had this thought recently about, I don't know if this is going to make any sense to you or not, and I don't remember if I because sometimes like late at night, I'll have these thoughts and I'll just record them. And sometimes I posted them to that study group. I don't always, but I had this thought about like different sediments, kind of like sediments of dirt, that you would go out in the desert and dig down, and you can see kind of like dendrochronology in a tree. You can see the tree rings, and you can see, oh, if it's a big ring, that means that it rained a lot that year. If it's a narrow ring, it was kind of a drought. But you can see each ring is a year. You can see how old the thing is. You can do that with layers of earth because of the sediments that pile up. And that I think of like these cells as kind of sediments of this energy or this fundamental field, that the fundamental field, the first sedimental layer is whatever that quantumized electron or proton or whatever it is. And then as it combines with other things, it becomes an atom, and there's another layer. And then as those atoms combine with other atoms, they become molecules. And then those other molecules combine together to become cells or whatever. And they become neurons, and they become the stuff that we're made out of, which includes our thoughts and our feelings and our impressions and every experience of the world. It's kind of another thing that people like to I don't know if you've heard me talk about that energy as consciousness. I try to shy away from using that word, but I've heard people use that word before, that everything is consciousness. But I do think that there's something valuable in thinking about it that way, because I think there is this awareness and sensitivity of environment that happens at all of these different sedimental levels. And that as it sounds weird, as consciousness filters through all these different layers of sediment, it emerges into a conscious experience that we're having right now. And I think part of this, I went down the Stuart Hameroff rabbit hole. Do you know Stuart Hameroff?
You shared something from him on the open
in that
hearts
group
thing. About
so you listen to him talk about microtubules.
Yes.
And he and Roger Penrose, who did win a Nobel Prize for something that you win Nobel Prizes for. Yeah. was Penrose black holes? I think it was.
I mean, well, a lot of people have won Nobel Prizes for black hole stuff.
Okay. All right.
But Penrose was a big part of it.
But the two of them put together some theory that I admit I don't completely understand. But the way that I've understood what they're trying to say is that consciousness is not created by the human brain, but it's kind of filtered through these microtubules, that there's these very, very fine vibrations that they're able to detect when they study microtubules. And there's a connection between when microtubules start to deteriorate in a neuron and Alzheimer's disease. So linking it to memory, there's some basis or substance for that. But that there are these microtubules that are inside of every single neuron, and the vibration of those neurons might be sensitive enough that they're getting some kind of signal, contact, stimulus and response from that quantum realm, from deep within the subatomic particles, kind of. So I've got this image in my mind of that fundamental field that emerges through all of these sedimental layers of material that it becomes. And that's why there's so much variety in the world. That's why there's so much variety in my experience and your experience. So again, this is another long, indirect way of saying why this way of thinking helps me drop judgment and become the bodhisattva, because it also fuels my curiosity as to, like, we all have this common starting point, and we all have such variety in the ending points. What's going on there? So it makes me really interested to learn about other people and their experiences.
So. You feel like your consciousness, your energy, or whatever is eternal?
It depends on what you mean by your.
Yeah.
Because my consciousness of Glenn Osland, no, I don't think that my consciousness of Glenn Osland is eternal. I think it exists from when I was born in maybe when I was conceived and started becoming aware of things in utero, and then when I die, that ends. But the consciousness that is being filtered through me, I think, is eternal. And the question is whether there's a record of all of the experiences that consciousness has had as it has been me, that is also part of that embedded deep intelligence that is the intelligence of that fundamental field.
Yeah. So how extreme do you take this belief, right? Because the real, struggle of life, I imagine, well, that's really way too profound for me to try to say, but how do you handle like the other, right? The other consciousnesses that you interact with, like when you talk about how, the deep down level, we're all the same, I should drop judgment. And this concept of like dropping judgment, to me, it raises my cackles, you might say, because it feels like a very it feels like justification for oppression, that it's an argument from the status quo, that, hey, we all need to just relax, everything's going to be fine. The people, if there's oppression in the world or whatever, you can't really do anything about it.
Whoa. Why
Well,
do you go there?
Because if you're dropping judgment, you shared a thing where like a psychic lady or
the Wendy Kennedy Pleiadian.
Not Wendy Kennedy, the Pleiadians, but the lady who went into your like Akashic record and your past lives.
The Christy Kephart.
Yeah. And she brought up, I don't know if it was you or herself, where she was talking about, in this past life, I was part of the German Nazi, guy, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you drop judgment for Nazis, right? That's the bottom line question.
Do I drop judgment for Nazis? Geez, man, you're backing me into a corner, Ren. No, I mean, I have this initial repulsive reaction and response that would be very fascinating to explore why it is that I have that and share that with many people. But it goes back to kind of what I was trying to describe with that idea of different layers of sediment, which in some traditions have been called samskaras, that are all of the experiences of life that you're using as a filter for Nazi. So if somebody was raised pro-Nazi and they hear the word Nazi, they're going to have a different reaction and response to it than I do. I'm going to have a very like visceral judging. So if when I'm talking about dropping judgment, I don't mean like going, okay, well, inhumane acts towards other people are okay. What I'm saying is if there's somebody who's standing in front of me and they were a Nazi, they were a Nazi at one point in their life, or maybe they still are, that I listen to them, that I still judge them based on who they are, not on who I think they are, based on these assumptions and biases that may or may not actually map onto who they really are right now. And, so I just to be a little bit more open and detached instead of going into that like super judgmental. And it's kind of, one of the criticisms I remember when I was getting into this whole ex-Mormon podcasting thing, and I had never followed Mormon apologists. I just didn't care. And so there would be ex-Mormons who would critique the Mormon apologists. And one of the main critiques was, is it the ex post facto argument? It's something like that they've already come to the conclusion that they're going to come to. They're not really following the evidence where it's going to take them. They're starting with the conclusion and they're working backwards. And that's kind of what you do when you judge another person. You've got this idea of who they are. And so you retrofit all of your evidence to try to validate this impression that you already had that could really be based on biases and stereotypes that might be accurate when you find out about who the person is, or it might not be. But it's more that kind of like intellectual honesty that I want to strive for. But that doesn't mean that I am, just because I want to drop judgment doesn't mean that I do. Or doesn't mean that it comes easy to me or natural to me. But it's more of I want to be fair. I want to give people the benefit of the doubt when I can. I want to. Yeah.
Do you think that the attitude of like dropping judgment, does it placate you? Does it wanting to drop judgment and kind of give everybody enough breathing room to make their case? Does it take the wind out of your sails for working towards a more just future, a more just society?
You tell me. You've been listening to this podcast for a while. What do you think?
Well, I think it does. I think so there's this essay by Karl Marx where he talks about how, religion, the kind of famous phrase from Karl Marx of how religion is the opiate of the masses, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that same essay, he talks about, criticism of religion, and that, criticism of religion is a criticism against the conditions that require a religion, right? And so criticism of religion ultimately must lead to criticism of politics, right? And so
you're saying that politics are part of the conditions that require a religion in the first place?
Yeah, politics make up our society,
Yeah.
it's the reason that our world is the way it is because of politics. Like we are all political.
I think of politics
people.
and religion at kind of a similar level, and that there's forces that are more fundamental to each one of them that create those systems. Does that make sense? Like, so for example, what I got really interested in several years ago was cognitive distortions.
Mm-hmm.
The and how religion shapes our minds to have certain expectations of the world. And rather than wanting to focus so much on how bad the Mormon church is and just want to kick the shit out of all the time, I wanted to focus on the mind of the people that, first of all, my mind. I wanted to better understand what are my cognitive distortions, and that includes things like black and white thinking and catastrophizing that
Mm-hmm.
would make me more closed off rather than being open to other people. So I see the mind as being, and what was it that Karl Marx said that supports religion? It's the fundamental what?
The criticism of religion is the criticism of the conditions that would require religion.
So to me, it's the mind that I want to go to and explore when I'm trying to find the conditions that would create the religion, or even the conditions that would create the politics, the political, like any kind of community set of structure, rules, norms.
So you don't think that your material conditions that you find yourself in are not that politics has no play in those material conditions?
No, I don't think that what?
I think I went 2 steps backwards or something. So yeah. So you're saying that religion.
I'm saying that I'm not as interested in politics as I am in the mind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'm trying to say, what I think I'm trying to say is that the mind is shaped just like cells are shaped by your environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that environment is shaped by politics.
And politics is shaped by human minds. First and foremost, there were human minds before there were politics.
Yeah, but there was, but now there is a superstructure, right? A societal like structure that we live in, that is imposed on us, right? And that feedback is now, is now, influencing our minds, right?
Yeah, and I think the amount of influence that structure has on your mind is related to the amount of exposure you give yourself to, like, political issues, political arguments.
Right. So this journey inward, this like, journey inward to drop judgment.
Yeah.
Is it taking away the energy needed to change the structures, the political structures?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, because I think what's going to change the political structures, and I think we're seeing it happen, I think we're living through it right now as things are beginning to crumble. It's because the dissatisfaction in people's minds and saying, I've been told all this time that this is how it is, but it's not how it has to be, and I'm going to change it. And the first place to make those changes, I think the first and most effective place to make those changes is individually, that human mind. And then there are concentric spheres of influence that you have of people around you. But I see, I've never been that drawn to politics, although I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity a lot, but it was because I had a job where I was in the car, and it was before the internet, and there wasn't talk radio anywhere except this conservative talk radio. And sometimes I'd listen to music, and sometimes I just wanted to hear ideas being discussed. And that eventually drove me to kind of hate Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, because I'm like, man, they are sure like pompous blowhards. I do not like the way that they're doing it. But I've never really been all of that attracted to politics. And when Trump was elected in 2016, I kind of went down that whole rabbit hole of, let's get the pitchforks out and fight against this guy. And, we did a couple of episodes on Infants on Thrones around the dossier and some things like that. And I was watching Rachel Maddow every night, and I was working myself up into such an impotent rage. There was nothing I could do about this stuff. And I was so filled with anxiety. And then on top of that, I was having stuff going on with my job and stuff with my marriage, and just like, okay, something's got to give here. And so I disengaged from Rachel Maddow. I really disengaged from all of the political stuff. And so I'm wondering if maybe that's what you're responding to, because I'm not like a big proponent of this is bad and this has got to change and we've got to take action right now.
Well, if you recall, on Infants on Thrones, just before the election in 2016, like, you had an episode where all of you were just going off on like, oh, it's going to be so great, Hillary's going to win.
Yeah, you say all of me. I don't think I was on that episode. That was like it was a John Hamer and Heather and Randy.
Yeah. And they're just
Jake,
basically gloting. Like, oh, this is all fine. Texas will be a Democratic state. You'll see.
Yeah, right. and I just so did not care at all. Like, that's cool. That's what they want to talk about, do an episode about. Fine. But it wasn't anything that I was particularly interested in. And I do remember there was quite a response to listeners that were like, hey, just because we're ex-Mormons doesn't mean that we're Democrats. We don't want to be, listening to all this liberal bullshit from people who don't really know what they're talking about.
So. Yeah, well, it's interesting to me because of the path that I went on after 2016. Like, I kind of told you a little bit about it on the Open Hearts thing, but like, I guess I didn't say too much about it, but like, I kind of went opposite, I think. Well, not necessarily opposite. Like, I was pissed off that Trump got elected, of course, apologies to the ex-Mormons who are conservatives. But
You're allowed to be pissed off.
And
you don't have to apologize to anybody for that, Ren.
Yeah, but it drove me much more left, to the point of where I was like, Rachel Maddow, she doesn't know what she's talking about, from like the left side, right? I had a very good friend who served a mission with me in Indiana, and we actually were, not companions, but we served in the same like area in Bloomington. What I was telling you about. Yeah, and I reached out to him as I was leaving the church, and I was like, what in the world is this? Are you still in the church? And he's like, no. I was like, oh, okay. But he kind of, I'd vent to him about how pissed off I was about the election and stuff. He's like, yeah. He was just like, yeah. Well, maybe you should listen to this. Maybe you should listen to this. And I started listening to like these like, way far left like podcasts and stuff, and I got really energized and like way more like interested in politics, right? Like and so I think it's interesting that it kind of you got kind of turned off, or maybe you were already turned off to it. Maybe it's just that's been your nature this whole time. But to me, I felt like that same phrase from like Marx, right? That criticism of religion is a criticism of the conditions that would necessitate religion.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, the conditions that necessitate like religion is chiefly and foremost at this point of time, like capitalism, right? And
yeah, I haven't put any thought into this, Ren, but when you give that Karl Marx quote, I think that you could just as easily substitute politics for religion in there, and that a critique of the politics is really the critique of the system. Yeah,
exactly.
And so if you're going to talk about capitalism, I would want to go, what is it about the human mind that makes you think that it's okay to, like there's different types of capitalism. There's different forms of capitalism. And I think a lot of times when capitalism is being critiqued, it's the exploitation of other people. So what is it in somebody's mind that would make them think that it's okay to take more than they give?
Yeah. And you're saying that that root in the mind is the true thing that creates the condition that people need a religion for. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I'm not tying it to religion. I'm saying,
sure.
I think that condition in the mind that says, for example, there's only so much, there's the scarcity, and I got to get mine because nobody's going to get it for me. And, you've got these stories in your mind that creates the systems that we're critiquing as capitalism, or it bleeds into religion as well. But it all stems from this story that we either create or we're taught, and we believe it, that there's no such thing as a free lunch, and you gotta, just like all of these different things that really form our expectations of the world. And then it shows up in politics. But politics also, it's a revolving door, because politics is one of the things that it influences those stories as well.
Yeah. So taking that journey inward, when you're talking about these things in your mind, like what would cause someone to feel like they can take more than they give?
Right.
When you look inward towards yourself, the belief that we all are part of this sedimentary construction of,
just call it energy.
This energy.
I win.
Damn it. Knowing we're all the same, knowing that we're all built out of the same stuff. Do you believe it enough to sell all your possessions to the poor? Sell all you have and give it to the poor?
Not yet. No.
That's the real crux of it, isn't it? Like, and that's like, I think,
Well, but that's like that's like an extreme. I mean, like it doesn't mean that I'm not compassionate and generous towards the poor. It doesn't mean that that I'm comfortable taking more than I give. That's the thing. So like when I look at society and I look at politics and I critique it and I say, oh, the problem here is that there's something in the mind that makes it think that it's okay to exploit another person. Then I go, I better not exploit people, or now I'm the hugest hypocrite in the world.
But don't you feel that appeal though? Like, don't you feel like I don't you feel that appeal when you hear that story of Jesus, talking to that guy and to the rich man and saying, if you really believe in me, sell all you have and give it to the poor and follow me. Like doesn't that grab you? And like, I mean, of course, I'm hypocritical in this statement because I feel the same way, like I come up when you start talking about these like justifications of like, oh, well, that's extreme. I am generous. I'm compassionate. I give to people, blah, 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 but
well, Jesus also said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's and, whatever the blah, 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 the kingdom of God thing too. So no, I don't find that a compelling thing because Jesus said to do it, to just do it, because I don't think that I mean, for so many reasons, I don't find that compelling, but I do find compelling to say, put aside, maybe the Yoda version of that is that you must unlearn what you have learned, like whatever you think that set that aside and come and follow this path of service to others. Drop all of your prejudices, drop all of your stereotypes, everything that you think should prevent you from really being of service and compassionate to others. Just let that go, put that aside and be generous of heart, generous of spirit. Not necessarily you got to sell all your things, but your ideas, your mindset, your beliefs. So if I take a metaphorical interpretation of that quote, I could maybe, I don't know if I would get a temple recommend by answering something like that, but
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think I feel like I feel like, no, don't, this isn't metaphor. This isn't, symbolism. This is the real world. This is our material conditions. And what the belief that we're all equal means is that we should all be treated equal, and being treated equal means taking from the rich and giving to the poor, right? And that's, I don't know. Like one of my favorite, back in church days, one of the more admirable stories of Joseph Smith is that story of somebody came to a meeting or something and said so and so got, I can't remember the details of the story, but this saint, he got attacked by the mob and is now lost all of his possessions, and everybody started just talking about, oh, how bad they felt about him. And then Joseph Smith took out a hat and said, I feel bad about it. I feel bad by $5.
Yeah,
by
right,
this
yeah,
much.
yeah.
And then pass it around. Yeah. Like that, I like that appeals to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But whether it's money or it's just like, let's go build this guy's barn, or let's go babysit their kid, do something, do some act of service. Let's just go sit and talk with them and listen to their story. There's all different ways that you can show that kind of care and compassion to each other, where that story is just like, are you just going to sit here and bitch about it, or are we going to do something about it? And I don't think that what I'm doing in saying I want to drop judgment and become the bodhisattva is saying I just want to disengage from everybody and not help anybody. Like I want to withdraw and become a hermit and not be part of the world, or I want to sell everything and not be part of this system. It's more for me about like really this close examination of I think of the faith crisis in Mormonism as a microcosm for this sort of thing, where I was raised to believe things that I later found out weren't necessarily true, but I sure as heck believed them. And you couldn't convince me any other way until, for whatever reason, I finally saw it. And if that happened to me in the Mormon church, in this really, really small microcosm of culture, what's to make me think it's not going to happen in the rest of the world? And that whether it's political ideas, or this is how your school system has to be, or this is how business has to be, you have to have a 9 to 5, like all of these human constructs. It's one of the reasons why I loved the book Sapiens, is like pointing out all of these fictions, these intersubjective realities that are really just the fabrications of people's mind, that we're agreeing to live under these conditions, but they're not natural in the way that they grow out of the world, except through human minds. And that's how they're an extension of nature.
Yeah. Well, that is cool. Yeah. Hey, did you ever start reading Dune? Like the mushroom people are talking to you?
Yeah. I haven't finished. No, I haven't finished it yet. But I'm more than halfway through. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. I just listened to it as well, and I was really excited when you were talking to the mushroom people about it.
Yeah.
And are you gonna have a conversation with them about it?
Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe. I love talking about Dune.
Yeah, I don't even know if I'm going to finish the audio book before I go see the movie, because the movie comes out this week, right?
Yeah, next weekend. Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to see. I think I've seen enough of the book that I could follow along the movie and know what's going on with it. But
I think there's a ton of themes from it that are definitely right in your alley, and in this whole conversation you've been having with people so much about everything being made of energy, and memories, and what memories are, and all of that stuff.
Premonitions and magic, and the way I forget what I don't even remember the characters' names right now. But the one that was married to the Duke, or she wasn't. She was always a concubine. They keep making that point. She never did marry him, but she was trained in this ancient way of being able to manipulate people's minds just by the words that she uses. I love that idea.
Yeah,
because we have that all around us. I mean, the words that people use, and you talk about politics. It's so I don't know, I wouldn't say easy, but words have tremendous influence over people's minds. And they're just air molecules that are bouncing off of each other.
I guess this is kind of the end of the time. I don't know if you need to jet off. Sounds like somebody's got a piano recital. No?
Yeah. Aaron's playing piano in the background. I enjoyed this a lot, Ren. I've really enjoyed every time you've contributed to that study group. It's kind of fallen off over the last month or so, but are you mad at me
about
is that why you haven't been sending anything in the study group? You're mad at me?
I'll admit I got pretty upset about the Wendy Kennedy
Orion one
thing, and then I I understand, it was just kind of some teasing back and forth about it, but that's what I'm talking about though, Glenn, is that okay, she comes out with this full-throated denial of human caused climate change, right? She just plain out says it. Well, the Palladians say it, right, that climate change isn't real. And the climate change
is not what happening. She said.
That's exactly what.
That's not what I heard. No.
Okay,
what I heard is that climate change is real, but there are other factors besides this. And I'm gonna play the clip.
Play the clip. Climate change is not real. That's what she said. She said, sure, there's changes in temperature, and then she went on to say that the reason the world is getting warmer is because of the photonic energies in the galactic alignment that's happening right now. And that it's all part of this, this phase transition that the Earth's going through, or whatever. She uses the term phase transition, but so I feel like this is a common thing in like people who practice these alternative thoughts, and like, there's a very famous it's not very famous, but some people think that there is a strong like woo to right-wing politics pipeline, right? Because this messaging that like you just need to focus on yourself, and you just need to find your inner, balance your inner chakras, or absorb more orgone energy or something, and work on yourself, and become the best person that you can be, and kind of ignore these other things around you, ignore your environment, ignore like the situations that are happening around you, because they're not what's really important. But we are these things are important, right? We're in an existential like situation with regards to climate change, right? And the messaging that you can just not worry about it and ignore it, that like really like kind of set me off. And I don't know, it's frustrating to me.
Yeah, and I didn't hear that was the message, to like not worry about it and just ignore it. In fact, I remember her distinctly talking about the way that humans are polluting the planet is very real and needs to be addressed. But so like I interpreted your reaction to it as a very valid response based on everything that you've ever experienced in your life. And it's different from my reaction to it because we've had different experiences in our life. But I don't, like, I'm not in that camp. Like, if you're trying to put me in the camp of just go inward and don't care about anything else in the environment and be a denier of climate change and things like that. Like, to me, I would say maybe that's some stereotyping and biasing on your part that you're putting onto me, because I sure don't feel that way, and that's not what I'm saying. But you've made these associations with that message and things like this. So that's what I think's going on. But I don't know, Ren.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's kind of not really like I don't want to, like I mentioned in like one of the very first things, like I don't want to be a really like, well, actually this is this way and actually this is this way kind of person, because I do really like the Palladian stuff, and like hearing people's ideas on what could like the universe mean, because I like hearing that kind of stuff. It's fun. But yeah, definitely we bring our own biases to things, and I maybe let mine shine a lot.
Well, the one thing that's really important to me that when I was talking about my reaction to Rachel Maddow, I mentioned that's really loud. Now I've got the dog singing along the piano in the background.
Nice. He's pretty good.
I know. Is the anxiety that I had just like my cortisol levels were sky high blood pressure. It just wasn't physically healthy for me. It wasn't mentally, emotionally healthy for me. And what I believe, I think this is right, that when you're triggered in that fight or flight state, the options narrow. Like ways to respond. You just don't have your full faculty of reasoning at your disposal because you're really triggered on fight or flight or freeze. And so when I hear like Wendy Kennedy talking about the climate change and things like that are going on in the world. What I think she's saying to people is, don't allow yourself to be so worked up that you're in a state that's unhealthy for you. Not disengage from this completely and don't do anything to fix the problems. So I hear it as, yes, that there are definitely issues in the world and they need to be considered, but don't get sucked into the catastrophizing that is one of those cognitive distortions that once you develop these habits of how you see the world and you start seeing catastrophes everywhere and making mountains out of molehills and things like that. But then you go, okay, but what if it really is a mountain and it's not a molehill? Don't tell me that it's a molehill when it's really a mountain, and
yeah.
So I can see that. But what I heard her saying in that thing, and I thought that whatever it's called that she did, that story that she told about people in Orion system that had thought control. It reminded me of the plot to Minority Report, actually. But like stretching the imagination to think, what would it be like if we lived in a world where our thoughts really were policed and monitored and things like that? Because it's not that far of a stretch from the way that things seem to be headed right now. But that was the part that I found really interesting. And so she's saying, get control of your thoughts, get control of your mind. And I like that message. That really appeals to me. Cool. But it doesn't mean close your eyes to the plights of humanity and the suffering of people around you.
I hope so. I mean, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so I guess I've been planning a pretty good thing to send in for the Open Hearts thing.
Oh, good.
Especially with that, I listened to the Gene Keys thing you sent out,
Oh yeah.
And yeah, definitely had some fun phrases from there.
That is my newest favorite book. And if you think that Wendy Kennedy is out there, the Gene Keys stuff is way out there, but I just love it. I love it. Man. And did you also listen to the one with Bernardo Kastrup?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Kind of follow up from the Don Hoffman stuff, kind of.
Yeah. I look forward to that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it more. So.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Well, thanks for doing this, Ren. And yeah, anytime, like if there are other things that I'm playing fast and loose with and I need correction or like, I love it.
Oh,
so,
cool.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun tonight.
Yeah, I did too. This was a great time. Can't wait to tell my friend Kyle that was on Infants on Thrones. Oh, I got a request. You're gonna put the normal kind of stinger with Jason Mraz on here.
I can, but do you have another request?
Yeah, put in the Internationale, the original French.
You're gonna have to send me the link to that.
All right, I'll send you the link to
it. All right. Take care, Red.
Okay, bye-bye.
Put down the weapons that you use against yourself. You don't need them anymore.
All right. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Just want to remind you, if you'd like to support this podcast financially for as little as $1 a month, you can do that on Patreon. You can find more information about joining Patreon under this episode on infantsonthrones.com. You can also fill out the Mindfulness Survey if you'd like to do that. I'd love to hear from you. And, I am a life coach, and I'm a pretty good one, and I do 30-minute free consultations. So if you're interested in scheduling a 30-minute free consultation with me to see what I could do to help you as a life coach, you can schedule that from the website, Infants on Thrones, as well. Look under this episode, 786, Transgender Testimony Time. I'll put a link there. And thanks, Ren, and thanks, Annie, and thanks all the rest of you for listening. Anyone for the closing prayer?
Hello, brothers and sisters. This is Elder E. Eldon Elderman of the 7th Quorum of the 70. When I'm not interviewing children about their masturbation practices, I monitor the Infants on Thrones podcast for the Strengthening the Members Committee. If you really like what you hear, you can jeopardize your eternal salvation by giving the Quorum a 5-star rating and writing a short review on iTunes. I didn't, but that's because I want to be resurrected with my genitalia intact. Anyone for the closing prayer?
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.